Anybody that has been on the Navajo Res has either probably heard of or had some creepy things or experienced some pretty creepy things. Namely, skinwalkers. I have only seen one, and here's my story. I come from a small town in northern Arizona that's sandwiched between the Paiute Reservation to the north and the U.S.'s largest Navajo Res to the south. My high school being so small, a 1A high school that has, on average, 80 students enrolled every year, always had to travel south about 5 to 10 hours one way to play another high school in any sport. This means that we traveled a lot on the Navajo Res, and we usually stayed at hotels when we would head out to play and come home in the morning. But this trip was a little bit different. I remember the basketball coach saying that the school didn't have enough money to put up the teams in a hotel that trip. So, we were going to be on the road for a total of about 12 hours. I was the only male senior to play basketball that season. We had just got done playing our game and headed home on our bus, Big Blue. We were headed out, and it wasn't long, about 2 hours of driving, before we had entered into the res. By this time, everyone was asleep, with it being about 2 in the morning. When we had crossed the res's border, I noticed the bus driver had sped up and was now going about 85 miles an hour. I thought this was a little weird because he never exceeded the speed limit, at least not in my high school career. For some reason, I couldn't fall asleep like the rest of my teammates, and I just sat at the back of the bus, staring out across the desolate desert landscape that was lit up by the full moon. As I looked out, I could see a figure running towards the bus at an angle of pursuit, and keeping up with the bus at roughly 85 miles an hour. As this figure got closer, I saw that it was a humanoid form. As a matter of fact, it looked exactly like a human, only that the face was painted half black and half white, with glowing eyes. Glowing eyes like a rabbit's eyes, reflecting light from a spotlight. I immediately thought, it's a skinwalker. The skinwalker ran up to the edge of the road and just kept up pace with the bus, hurdling sagebrush and rocks while staring right at me. After I made eye contact with the thing, I couldn't look away. It was as if something was holding my head and eyes in place. The thing just smiled at me, this very inhuman smile that went ear to ear, showing crooked, yellow, pointed teeth. I felt like I was going to throw up, and I was panicking through the entire ordeal. The skinwalker started to crumple down on all fours, still keeping up with the bus. I could see his bones crack and reform. Hair began appearing all over the skinwalker's body, and in about 3 seconds was now a coyote, and it ran off back into the desert, far out of view. As soon as it was gone, I ran to the onboard bathroom and puked a mixture of food and blood. I didn't want to tell anybody for fear they would think I was crazy. So, I confided in my Navajo friend. She told me that I needed to see the chief, who also happened to be a friend of mine, and get a blessing. I saw him the next day in school in the parking lot. He just came up to me and mumbled something in Navajo while waving a feather serpent-like thing, turned around, got in his truck, and drove away. To this day, I haven't seen another skinwalker, and it might be due to the fact I moved away from that town and res, and if I do have to go south, I go around, way around. This story happened late June, right before the 4th of July. I don't know if I believe that this is what I truly experienced, but my best friend's great-grandmother is certain. For reference, I am a 20-year-old female. My fiancé and I finally had a few days off this summer and decided to take a little trip. We live in northern Utah and decided to head to Wyoming to buy some cool fireworks and camp out. Plus, His grandparents live very close to our desired camping location. My fiancé, whom for the story we'll call Jake, has a hatchback, and we planned on lowering the back seats and just sleeping in the car. After purchasing some fireworks, we head out to our camp location. It was called Blazon. The roads were rough and narrow, and there were about 1,000 wild rabbits running around. Other than that, the road was pretty clear. We parked our car behind a mountainous pile of rocks to block out as much light pollution from the nearest town as possible. I had never seen the stars so bright. It was still pretty light when we got there, and I took in as much of my surroundings as my eyes could handle. We made a fire as it started to darken. We cooked some hot dogs and set off some aerial fireworks before deciding to call it a night. We climbed in the car, and Jake fell asleep pretty quickly. I, however, felt very strange. I opened the back of the car to take in the silence, the pure blackness of the night. I've been camping before, but I had never felt like this. I wasn't scared, but I wasn't comforted. The blackness ahead of me felt almost unreal, like I could reach out and touch rich black velvet. Or perhaps it felt like a projection, like what I was seeing wasn't real. I decided to call it a night and shut the hatch. I didn't sleep very well. We woke up fairly early, at about 6:30 a.m. We had planned to go shooting a bit, since I had never seen so much as held a gun, and go to Opal for arrowhead and rock hunting. I exited the car and walked a few feet away to pee, and literally 10 feet to the left of the car was a sheep's corpse. Like I said, I took a good look around when we first arrived. It wasn't too dark for me to notice the previous day. In fact, our campfire was about 5 feet from it. Out of morbid curiosity, I went to investigate. It was probably the most disturbing and eerie thing I had ever seen. It looked freshly killed, yet the sheep's innards and bones were entirely gone, other than the skull. The eyeballs were still intact, and that's usually the first part of a body to decompose. It was like it was completely hollowed out, but there was no blood anywhere. No dried blood, or any sign that this was an animal's meal. Something else I noticed that was strange was the skin looked almost leathered where it was peeled back. But seeing as it was so fresh, I knew that was impossible. I yelled to Jake, who had been camping in this area very many times in his lifetime, to see if he had any ideas. He was completely baffled. We decided to just sleep in his grandparents' house that night, so we quickly packed up and left. As we were leaving, I saw yet another sheep's corpse, exactly like the other, right on the side of the road that we had traveled on to get there. There was no way we could have missed that. We were paying very close attention to the road because of all the rabbits. Now, I was really uncomfortable. However, the rest of the trip was a lot of fun. In fact, while we were shooting, I found half an antelope's skull that was a bit bleached by the sun. I thought it was pretty cool, so I put on some gloves and bagged it up, with the intent of cleaning and sanitizing it when I got home. Once we got back home, I decided to stop by and see my best friend. We were driving down the road, smoking cigarettes, when my car suddenly broke down. I was feeling pretty unhappy, but while we waited for my father to come help me tow it or push it to the nearby mechanic to leave overnight, I told her about my weird sheep corpses. My best friend is Native American, and immediately got very extremely uncomfortable and told me to talk to her great-grandmother. I agreed, and visited within the next few days after my car had been repaired. However, I felt very ill the day after my car broke down. I had the flu, which was unusual for the time of year. I wanted to keep my visit brief in fear of getting them sick, but I ended up staying there all night. I told her about my experience with the sheep, the weird feeling I had the first night, and the antelope skull. She was positive I came across something called a skinwalker, a person, a witch, with the supernatural ability to turn into any animal he or she desires, to be able to transform. Legends sometimes require that the skinwalker wears a pelt of the animal. They are believed to be very evil, and Native Americans refused to talk about them at night, which explained why my best friend was so uncomfortable. Her great-grandmother also mentioned that running into a skinwalker can cause disease and bad luck, like my car breaking down and contracting the flu. After her telling me all of this, I was really scared and overwhelmed. She asked me if I took any strange souvenirs, and I told her about the antelope skull. She told me to go home, bury it in a field, and I should be fine after that. Well, I did just that. As soon as I came home, I grabbed a shovel and the skull, went to an old field and buried it. I burned some sage after I buried it at the site, in my car and in my room. However, she said that may not take care of my bad luck. And she's right. My car continues to mysteriously break down, again and again, immediately following repairs. I don't really know what to believe. Bad luck happens, and my car is a bit old, and it's bound to have problems, and I frequently still get sick. But I still can't explain what I saw, and why I felt what it felt. Does anyone have any suggestions or ideas? If this really is the work of a skinwalker, I need to know what to do just to get my life back on track. I'm a poor college student, and I can't afford fixing my car. I just replaced the power steering rack, and that set me back $600. Immediately after getting that repaired, my brake light and training light came on. I checked my transmission fluid, and there's definitely a leak or something going on. Any advice or speculation is always appreciated.